and then Claire will be doing a roll call and getting the meeting started and moving. What we'd like to do is after that we have two folks speaking, Sherry and Nina will talk. What we'd like to do is have everybody mute during those calls. What we will ask to do is that when Sherry's talking, go ahead, if you have questions, submit those into the chat window. And then what we'll do is when Sherry's done, I'll go through and basically go through the chat questions that have been asked. I can ask those to Sherry and then she can do it. It'll just eliminate some of the back and forth with trying to figure out who's asking. And then once we've gone through all the ones in the chat, I'll ask folks that are on the telephone if they have questions that they'd like to ask, and we'll go through those. Then we'll go on to Nino's doing the second report and basically follow the same process. And then we'll go into the topic that Claire and I'll discuss about our best practices. At that point, Claire's going to walk through basically asking each of the SIGs to give, I think we allocated 3 minutes for them to talk about the topic. And then again, at the end, we'll ask questions about that if you'll put those into the chat. And we'll see how this goes and see how well it works, and then we'll go through that. And with that, at least initially, is there anyone that has a question up front about how we're going to proceed?
There is a request for people to put their microphones on mute because there's some feedback. Whoever's talking, you can actually hear them off of the speaker.
Right.
So I think for the most part, people should work with their microphones on mute.
Yes. Okay. All right. So with that, I think we'll do here one question. I was just going to ask Vicki if you had anything that you'd like to say up front or not.
Oh. Hi. I was good about putting myself on mute, so it took a minute. No, I don't have any overall comments. Okay. I'm excited to see how this format goes, though, Jeff. This is something new and innovative, and good luck. I'm here to listen. It sounds like an interesting agenda.
Okay. So at the end of this, just to let you know, we are recording this. The options, what the plan is to record save the chat out also, and that we will we'll figure out the right place to put up at minimum the audio, but ideally we'll put up the video and the audio so that other folks that if there was something they wanted to look at or come back, we could do that, and we'll go ahead and get started from there. So with that, I will turn it over to Claire.
Hi all, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to do a quick roll call as quickly as we can do this. There are a few SIGs who are not in attendance, so I'm going to be skipping over them, but everyone else, hopefully I catch you. And if we get to the end and I haven't called your SIG, please let me know. SIG Access, you can go ahead, actually, let me step back and say, go ahead and introduce who you are, what role you play in the SIG, and then we'll move on to the next one. So SIG Access, let's start with you.
Yeah, hi, I'm Sherry Trewin. I'm the SIG Access Chair.
Okay, SIG Act. SIG Act on yet?
I just got on.
Oh, perfect.
Bobby Kleinberg from SIG Act.
Okay, SIG ADA?
SIG ADA, this is Drew.
ADA, sorry, I always...
That's okay. Yeah, I'm Drew Hamilton. I'm the chair of SIG ADA.
SIG AI.
This is Rose Paradis. I'm the Secretary Treasurer.
Excellent. SIG ARC.
Hi, this is Sarita Arte. I'm the chair of SIG ARC.
SIG DED.
SIG, my name is Jörg Henkel. I'm the SIG DA conference chair, stepping in for Sharon Hu, who is the SIG DA chair.
Okay. SIG Bio.
Hi, I'm Srinivas Aduru, chair of SIG Bio.
Perfect. SIG CAS.
Hi, I'm Sam Ravelski, vice chair of SIG CAS.
SIG Chi.
Hi, I'm Helena Mentis. I'm the president of SIG Chi.
SIG C.
Hi, I'm Adrienne Decker. I'm the current treasurer of SIG C.
SIG DA. All right, we'll skip them for now. SIG Doc. All right, we'll come back to them too. SIG Graph.
Scott Owen, I'm chair of the governance committee, sitting in for Sig Ralph.
Okay, perfect. SIG HPC. All right. SIG IR.
Hi, this is Diane Kelly. I'm the chair of SIG-IR.
Great. SIGITE.
Hi, this is Barry Lunt. I'm the chair of SIGITE.
SIG KDD. How about SIG Metrics?
Hi, my name is Kathy Xia. I'm a board member on the Sigmetrics board and representing Vishal Misra, who couldn't come today.
Perfect. SIG MIS. And SIG Multimedia.
Good evening, everybody. Alan Smeaton here, chair of SIG Multimedia.
And SIG Mobile. Looks like someone's there from SIG Mobile. You there? Okay, how about SIG Mod?
This is Juliana Fredi. I'm SIG Mod chair.
Excellent. SIG Ops.
It's Robert Van Renesse, SIG Ops chair.
And SIG Plan.
Benjamin Pierce, SIG Plan vice chair.
SIG SAC.
Ninghui Li, SIG SAC chair.
And SIG SAM.
Chris Brown, SIG SAM chair.
I feel like I'm in a Dr. Seuss book all of a sudden. This is SIG SIM.
Kara Olson, secretary treasurer for SIGSIM.
And SIG Soft.
Hi, this is Tom Zimmerman. I'm chair of SIGSoft.
SIG Spatial.
Yeah, Mohammed Mokbel, past chair and EC member of SIG Spatial.
SIGUX.
Lori Fox, chair of SIGUX.
SIG Web.
Hi, this is Dick Bolterman. I'll turn on my video. I represent the W's in the web world, and I'm at the web conference now. I've got another gig here at around 20 minutes past 12, California time. So in about 40 minutes, I'll have to gracefully bow out. But I'm here now, and I'm listening on my phone because it's a very noisy environment.
Okay, you know what? We'll do reverse order if you're around for the discussion section. Okay, I'm going to go through.
Excellent.
Name a few that didn't sound off. SIG DA.
Zig DA vice chair.
Okay, perfect. And SIG Doc. And SIG HPC.
Hi, Jeff Hollingsworth, chair of SIG HPC, just running a little late.
Perfect. SIG KDD. SIG MIS. SIG Mobile. Okay, well, hopefully those folks can join us. And thank you for being patient, and welcome to all of you who could join us today. As we said, this is an experiment, and already it's going pretty well. So at this point, we're going to have Sherry talk for a bit and give her report, if everyone could remember to put their microphones on mute. Myself.
Okay, guys, are you seeing the presenter version of my slides? Good.
Yes.
Good. Excellent. Hi. Really glad to have the chance to talk to you for a little bit today about accessible conferences. So, as I mentioned, I'm the chair of SIG Access, and the mission of SIG Access is to support researchers and professionals who are working in the area of information technology applied to empower people with disabilities and older adults. We aim to promote the professional interests of students and computing professionals with disabilities, as well as supporting careers for people with disabilities. We're a pretty small SIG, but we run a conference every year, the Assets Conference. And obviously, given our mission, one of our goals is to try to run a really, really accessible conference that people with different kinds of disabilities can all participate in on an equal basis as much as possible. So it's a pretty small conference, about 170 people, but we regularly have people who are deaf, are hard of hearing, people using all different kinds of power wheelchairs, manual wheelchairs, scooters. Always have people with visual impairment, which might be blind people or people with low vision or color blindness, usually all of those. We have people who are autistic or neurodiverse in other ways. People with speech impairment have given presentations. And of course, special dietary needs, we include that as well. So based on our experience with making assets accessible, I wanted to share a little bit about conference accessibility here. And apologies to those who were at the earlier small SIG meeting who might have heard this before. You can go and get a cup of coffee or just listen again because you might have forgotten something, right? So why do we go to conferences? There's, one reason is to learn about the latest research, but that's only one of many reasons. They help us to develop our new ideas, to demonstrate our expertise, to meet people and to have people know who we are, do networking, find collaborators and engage with people. So there's really a lot more to it than just consuming the presentations, right, as we all know. And making a conference accessible means all of these aspects of attending a conference. Now, the NeurIPS conference did a survey last year that included some questions about accessibility needs to the conference. And they had quite noticeable portions of people reporting some kind of impairment that might impact their experience, like difficulty in seeing or trouble remembering or concentrating, communicating, mobility issues, and hearing. And there were 1.4% of those respondents who reported actually experiencing some access difficulties at the conference. And some examples of these were having to stand for a long time at the poster session and just the noise and crowd at the sessions. Speakers and presentations making assumptions like that everybody in the audience had really good color vision or could see the slides. Finding safe food to eat was something that some people had difficulty with at that conference. And in fact, for people with disabilities, sometimes attending a conference can be risky, and there are some scary stories out there of incidences that have happened. When somebody couldn't get into the bathroom because their mobility scooter wouldn't fit, they tried to walk and nearly fell. Somebody who's giving a presentation with a power wheelchair might be feeling a little shaky as they get up to give their talk, and if there's no barrier around the edge of the stage, there's a fear that they might drive right off the edge of the stage. And a blind speaker actually did fall off a stage at one conference. And there are other issues to do with the hotels. People couldn't take a shower, and even sometimes people have ended up in hospital. So, but there's so much that conference organizers can do to enable people to attend confidently and get the most out of their conferences, and also to allow them to make informed decisions in advance about whether or not a conference will be accessible to them and appropriate for them to attend. So I wanted to introduce you to some researchers with disabilities and what helps them to participate at events like conferences. So I have on this slide, and all these images are used with permission from the individuals. I have on this slide Shiri Azencott from Cornell Tech and Matt King, who's an engineer at Facebook. They were on stage at a panel at the Grace Hopper celebration. giving a talk. Now, when they go to a conference, they appreciate features like the conference website being accessible to their screen magnifier or screen reading technology that they use. They appreciate if the proceedings meet accessibility standards so they can look at papers. They appreciate getting advanced access to the papers so they can have a little more time to consume them and decide who they're going to try to meet. Something that we do at Assets that people appreciate is we give a little orientation tour before the conference starts so that anybody who wants to can get an idea of the layout of the room, where the chairs and tables are going to be, where the walkways will be. And we provide student volunteers available as guides during the conference to help people get to where they need to be and manage things like buffets. And we also ask that presenters describe the visual materials they're using in their presentation. So if somebody is showing a video and it doesn't have a script, maybe just has background music, we'd be asking that presenter to describe what's going on verbally. So the accessibility kind of spans the whole range of right from proceedings to the moment of the presentations. Another group are deaf and hard of hearing people. So on this slide, there's a picture of my colleague, Brent Shiver, who's a deaf engineer at IBM. He went to Assets last year, and this is a picture of him presenting his poster. So at Assets, we always budget for sign language interpretation or captioning, and this applies to not just the conference sessions, but also the breaks and the social events, right? Because that's just as important a part of being there. We look for venues that have an induction loop or assistive listening devices that people can use. And we ask for presenters to caption their videos or verbally describe them for the interpreter while they're there. We also always use microphones for all the presentations and all the questions that are asked, because that makes the question audio much more accessible. And finally, something that Brent appreciates when he's at, well, no, actually not Brent, but someone who's hard of hearing appreciates when they're at a conference is a space that's a little bit quieter where they can have a conversation more easily with less background noise. Okay, mobility impairments, another important aspect, and here I have an image of Professor Jennifer Mankoff from Washington. So, the obvious thing you think about with mobility is wheelchair access. So that's not only is the venue accessible, but how would a person get from the airport to the venue? Is there an accessible public transport option or accessible taxis, and what would they be? Are there accessible hotel rooms available? And for people who are presenting, how are they going to get on the stage? What kind of stage it is? Are there safety rails? So Jan doesn't usually use a wheelchair, but she often uses a cane and doesn't like to have to walk too far. So she appreciates having advanced information about the distances involved in getting around in the conference and knowing where there are alternatives to taking up stairs or making long walks. She also appreciates if there are strategically placed chairs where she can sit down, take a break, especially during something like a poster session or a reception where most people might be standing. And again, having student volunteers available to assist attendees with mobility impairments is helpful, especially during meal times, to help them get their food if it's a buffet. Another category that is very present, perhaps under-noticed, is neurodiversity. So this is Sebastian Laduca, who's a student at Carnegie Mellon and a proud autistic. What Sebastian likes when he goes to a conference is to have information in advance about what it's going to be like. Especially, will there be very loud noises, loud music, bright lighting, strobes and spotlights, and things that might be very sensorily intense. He also wants to know things like where in the room are the audio speakers, because sometimes those speakers make a little buzz and he wants to be as far away from that buzzing noise as possible. Just like Shiri and Matt, he likes to have the proceedings in advance so that he can look at them in peace and quiet. And he appreciates a space in the conference where he can step away from all the noise and the hubbub and just have a little bit of downtime. Another thing, when he's in a room, he likes to sit in an aisle seat so that if he needs to leave, he can just quickly and discreetly leave the room. And something that really makes a difference for him is if the conference itself has an explicitly inclusive attitude. So some of the things that are helpful are when people communicate with him in a literal way, give him time to process and respond to what they've said. And his advice in general is, assume that you're dealing with an intelligent person, and if they seem to be behaving in a way that you don't understand, just ask, why are you doing this? We're supposed to be, it's time to sit down now. That sort of thing. And then special diets are another essential aspect of accessibility. People need to know whether or not there will be food that is safe for them to eat. Labeling food is important. And some people might ask in advance for detailed ingredients lists, and whether or not the food can be prepared without cross-contamination. So sometimes somebody might choose, if they can't get confidence that they'll have food that's safe to eat, maybe they would choose to attend remotely the conference if that's available. So what does it take to make your event accessible? Well, the first thing that we would recommend is to appoint an accessibility chair, or maybe even two, because there's quite a lot of different aspects to it, and choose a venue that is accessible, because once you've picked your venue, you're sort of stuck with it and you've got to make the best of what you've got. And then actually budget for accommodations, right? So sign language interpretation is not cheap, but Assets is a small conference. We don't charge a huge registration fee, but we always provide 3 sign language interpreters for the whole conference, and we budget for that right from the beginning. Another thing that we recommend is to provide on the conference website an accessibility FAQ. So this is a page that intends to answer some of the questions that prospective attendees with disabilities might have in advance. And I'll show you a little bit more about that in a minute. Make your conference website accessible, should be meeting accessibility standards so people can get the information. Helping authors to make their work accessible, make the proceedings accessible in the presentations. Make sure that you're gathering accessibility needs at registration and following up with people. Training student volunteers to help people with disabilities. And then at the conference itself, setting expectations and enforcing them in the actual sessions. So if this all sounds a bit overwhelming, don't worry, there's lots of resources available. And a good place to start is to put together an FAQ on accessibility for your event, because this will really prompt you to ask a lot of the right questions early on and have the answers ready when somebody asks. So this is an example of the accessibility FAQ from last year's Assets conference. It answers questions like, how do I communicate my needs? What are my transport options for getting there? What's the venue like? Will there be sign language interpretation? Can I bring my assistance dog? Can I attend by robot? Is there any smoking? That sort of that sort of question. And what we have at SIG Access to help with this is a generator for this kind of FAQ page. I'll show you in a second, but what it does is it prompts for the basic details about the conference, and then prompts for questions about the accessibility features of the conference, and then it will generate for you HTML text to go on your FAQ page. And the accessibility chairs and with the local arrangements people would edit that generated HTML, make sure it's correct for your conference, and put it up at your conference on a /access page is the usual place we put them. So I'm going to switch just for a sec to the SIG Access website. It's www.sigaccess.org, and under the resources menu, there's a link to the accessibility FAQ page generator. So I'm on that page right now. And if I just scroll down to where the actual form starts, see I filled in some basic information, the name of the conference, where it is, who's the accessibility person, how do we contact them, what's the venue, how do we contact the venue, and then goes on through the form with various bits of information, which mostly in this form have default values of we're still working on this, or mostly it's we're still working on this. So when you've filled in this form, or when you filled in part of the form, whatever information you have, if you scroll down to the bottom and you submit the form, you'll get your HTML code that you can then edit and put up on your FAQ page on your website. So we have a few other resources on the SIG Access website that you might like to check out. We have a guide for accessible writing, how to write about participants with disabilities. We have a guide for making PDFs accessible, accessible presentation guide. We have a guide for organizers of conferences on accessibility. And we have the FAQ page generator that I just showed you. And there are some other things in the works that are coming. We're working with the SIG Access group on a guide for student volunteers. And Kyle Rector and I are working on a guide for doing an accessibility walkthrough of a conference venue, and a sort of timeline of accessibility to-dos coming, moving up to a conference. So we'll be posting more general versions of these. And I also would recommend you have a look at what Stacy Branham provided for the SIGC conference earlier this year. In her guide for session chairs and her guide for presenters, she included accessibility information there that really set the expectations for the conference really nicely. And she also provided this welcome slide at the beginning of the conference, which also set the tone for the expectations of how SIGC is welcoming people of, well, all diversity groups, which points to a page on their website where people can provide feedback and input. So your one-stop shop, www.sigaccess.org/resources. That was all that I wanted to cover today. Do we have any questions?
Jeff Hollingsworth, first of all, thank you. That's an amazingly concise set of what has taken the SC conference more than 2 decades to learn and put together. And so what wonderful resources. Thank you very much. I had sort of one other suggestion, and something we've done that I don't know if others are doing, is we've taken to offering a prayer and meditation space one of our diversity and inclusion goals, and so that has been well received by those who wanted and needed it. So that was very good. I did also want to call you out on possibly one. So sorry for nitpicking. On your slide of your conference, behind the presenter were 3 very tall chairs that seemed like they were particularly unfriendly to anyone with mobility issues or short in stature. And did you get called out about that? And is that something you try to avoid?
So I think it depends, like what kind of chairs you want to have. That picture is not our assets conference actually.
Okay.
But it's an event, a workshop that we ran last
Okay.
year, and those chairs were just in the room. But I think it's one of the cases where like if this was a panel, I would say, yeah, that would be a problem.
Right.
If you're assuming that everybody's going to climb up onto those big tall chairs. If it's a presentation where there's a podium and the presenter doesn't want to stand through the whole thing, then maybe that's the right height of chair.
Certainly.
Yeah.
But
so,
yeah, I saw that and thought that seems like a poor panel chair choice.
It would be.
Went through my mind.
Absolutely. Yes, absolutely. Those just actually were the chairs that were in the room.
No problem. It's a nitpick, but I actually do try to look at spaces for exactly those kinds of questions.
No, it's a good point. Yeah.
I want to remind everybody, thank you for your question, Jeff. If you have questions, especially if we have quite a few, to use the chat function to ask them so that we can manage those better. So you can do that now, or if you have something come up, you can just interject. I want to thank Sherry again, because she and the assets group, as Jeff said, have provided us with such invaluable resources for this, and really, I think, saved the SIGs quite a bit of effort for such thoughtful work on their part to make all of our conferences better and more inclusive. And one thing I mentioned at our last meeting is that a guy in our field, Don Norman, wrote a book called The Design of Everyday Things, which some of you may have heard of. And he often talks about how accessibility isn't about people who are abled and not abled or less abled, but that all of us will find ourselves in places where we need accommodations in various ways throughout our lives. And in fact, he just wrote an essay because he's getting older now and is now paying attention to the ways in which things aren't designed well for older people. So accessibility is not something that you might assume, oh, we have a few members of our SIG who may need special accommodation. You really want to reorient your thinking about accessibility to include the fact that any number of your SIG members will need accommodation at any point throughout conferences and various events. So you really want to sort of open yourself up to accommodating and creating an inclusive environment in your conferences, as Sherry mentioned. So I really appreciate that. I'm just looking to see if we have questions.
We do.
So one question we have is, whose responsibility is it to ensure accessibility is done to 100%?
For a conference, I think everybody has some responsibility for the overall conference accessibility, right? If you have accessibility chairs, they have a responsibility to keep track of what's needed and to coordinate with everybody. But I can't think of any conference organizational role that doesn't touch on accessibility or needs some kind of attention to accessibility. So it's all of us.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm going to have to actually explain that question. So if you don't mind.
Oh.
So this is Helena Mentis from SIG Chi. We just had our Chi conference about a week ago in Scotland. We had what was called a crip-in, which was a crippled sit-in, because of, despite following every single one of these rules, things happen. We had 3,800 people and things happen. Cultural issues, for instance, we didn't know, somehow something got messed up with who had the key, because there's a key in Scotland to get into the accessible bathrooms. and there was a whole hullabaloo on the first day. I invited a number of our community members who had issues to come and talk to the SIGCHI EC. And one of the things we got dinged on was the templates for the new templates that everybody is going to for the ACM publications. And that's not even our fault, because everybody was saying that Overleaf for doing the LaTeX doesn't actually support blind users very well. We, for instance, had CART for one of our hearing impaired participants, but the Wi-Fi at the convention center went down and this person wasn't able to answer the questions asked of them during their own talk. So when things go wrong, there's very little, it's almost to a point where I don't know how to get ahead of these problems. And I really think that we did have accessibility chairs, of course, and it's really hard to say that they need to be running around thinking of every contingency plan that could possibly happen. I'm at the point where I'm thinking this needs to be a paid person who actually addresses accessibility. And to be honest, we're at the point where we think this needs to be at the ACM level, to have somebody whose job it is really to think about and to counsel and to support all of our conferences to take accessibility to the highest level, because we've even had people say that they're going to sue ACM at this point because they've said that they're tired of the fact that the conferences are not accessible to 100%.
So yeah, I think like one of the, having a person at the ACM level would be helpful in many ways, because not every community might easily be able to identify a person to be accessibility chair for all their conferences who really knows about accessibility, right? That's one thing. And having some permanent person would allow knowledge to be safely stored and more easily passed on between different events. And there is a lot to doing accessibility to 100%. There's certainly a lot to that, and in fact, I don't think the state of the art is quite there yet, right? With the templates being a case in point. LaTeX and PDF accessibility are much harder than they should be. Still, even after a lot of years of trying. So
I would like to comment on the templates. Yeah. I know that the CHI Publications Chair has been talking to Wayne with regard to the input that was received at the CHI conference. So I know there was a dialogue going on there.
Okay, well, obviously this is something that I don't think that can be, as you know, I know how frustrating it can be when you do all the things you think you should do and then you still have problems. And so it's something that I'm sure the ACM EC will continue to discuss and address and come up with solutions for. But sharing our experiences in that respect, I think, are really important. And I think, as Sherry mentioned, creating a culture of inclusivity from the beginning. Maybe this is something that the more that CHI outwardly attends to these things, the more people will trust that their needs will be met. But I don't think that's a very satisfactory answer to the issues that you were contending with. There are a few more questions I want to get to.
Claire, real quick.
Sure.
This is Jeff. Sorry, I wanted to mention there is a new group at the ACM level. I believe it's diversity and inclusion group that has been set up, that's been approved by the EC. Which is going to be may become a focal point for some of this. So that is so it is being looked at. Taking these issues up to the group like that is a good thing. Sorry, just
no, perfect. Thank you so much for mentioning that. We have a question about simultaneous translation. Is that under this purview?
Oh, into different spoken languages, I guess.
Yeah, I assume.
Yeah, that's that's not something that we've tried at Assets yet, but it does seem in the realm of equivalent facilitation, right? To help people to experience the conferences in the way that's best for them.
Yeah, this is Dick, and the reason that we brought this up is this is something that happens all the time, right? SIGWeb has for a long time tried to accommodate the needs that we have, that we sense from the community, but we've had some problem that you can't ask people often what their needs are. Having a check box for are you A, B, C, or do you need A, B, C, is sometimes seen as a confronting thing for people who register. But we're all deaf when you're in a room that you can't hear what's being said, and we're all blind if you can't see the sheets or watch the presentation. That kind of follows on with what Don Norman also says. And having a broader range solution, I think that for our conferences, it would really be helpful if there were a set of ACM guidelines that really helped us know what was expected of us at large and at small events. Right, there may be different guidelines for 70-person events as opposed to 7,000-person events. But having every organizer even adapt to the very nice set of suggestions that you have here sometimes brings up a burden. And this gets back to Helene's question of whose responsibility is this to really provide the tools and centralizing that, and somebody who's sensitive to the different regions in which our conferences go and what people need would really be very useful.
Mm-hmm.
So the next question, I think we need to wrap it up and move on to Nino's presentation, but the next question I think is important too. Are there contractors or consultants that other conferences have used to help with accessibility at conferences? I feel like to answer this question, if you have used a contractor or a consultant that you have found that has really helped you with these issues, go ahead and send that information to us or post it here to this group chat, and then we can distribute that information also, because I think that is an option that some SIGs are looking for. Thank you again, Sherry, so much for this very helpful information, valuable information. Again, if you have any additional questions, you can reach out to Sherry and we can continue to discuss these issues at future meetings.
Great, thanks everybody.
Thank you. Nino, you're up.
All right, I should be unmuted. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So, excuse me. I will give a brief overview of the activities of the ACM Pubs Board, since I'm the Pubs Board liaison. There have been a bunch of things that the Pubs Board has been doing, but I can't overview them all, and I'm not going to be able to give you all the details. Happy to share any of the documents, especially ones that do get approved. Obviously, those go in the public domain. I try to the extent that it is possible and reasonable to share with you, especially things that are approved by the Pubs Board, or if I'm being asked by certain committees to share. So I ask for feedback. Generally, I can assure you that the feedback that comes from the SGB is considered very carefully. In fact, it's an incredibly deliberative body. No stone, in a sense, is left unturned. Let's see, where do we start? Well, let's start with something that I think all of you are aware of, and that I, at this point, won't have very much to say, but just to make it clear that this is something that is happening. So ACM and the Pubs Board in particular is looking at the open access problem or issue. They're looking at various ways in which that might be addressed. They're looking at how this is going to impact the revenue model of the ACM Digital Library and ACM more generally, as well as the SIGs themselves. the issues with gold open access, who pays for what, how this can be done in a way that is consistent with various regulatory and government bodies, and things of that nature. These discussions are very much ongoing. I don't really have anything specific to report other than the fact that, in fact, it is being discussed. So, but I just wanted to mention it just so you know that it's happening as we speak. Another issue that I can't tell you very much on, because I don't think we have at this point reached an agreement, is the issue of changing names by authors and how that might impact the digital library. The reason why this is an important issue, obviously, is because of different members of the ACM, different people who publish, who decide to change their names for various reasons. The most common one is if somebody gets married and decides to adopt their spouse's last name. What happens to their publications at that point? And I'm sure that there are people on this call who, if they have not done it personally, they're familiar with somebody who has resorted to things like having one legal name and another name that they maintain for publication purposes and things of that nature. This issue also came to a head recently because there have been several transgender individuals in our community, and of course servicing their specific needs is something that is important as well. So there was a policy that was worked on by a subcommittee that's part of the publications board, and one of the issues that I think is going to be hard to resolve, even though there seems to have been made some progress has been made in the last week and a half or so, is the fact that the digital library is considered kind of inviolable, meaning that papers that get published in it are part of the historical record. So if a paper was published with the name, I don't know, John Doe 10 years ago, there was a position taken by the ACM in particular that that name cannot now be changed to Jane Doe and vice versa, retroactively. So in other words, that there is a record that basically needs to stay fixed, even though a lot of other stuff, including perhaps different aspects of the metadata, could be changed. That turned out to be controversial, and it was debated quite a bit. In the end, it looks like that particular policy will need to be, or that position of the ACM will need to be revisited. We'll have to see how that's going to be resolved, but there was a suggestion that there are two different records, if you will, one available to the public, another one behind, inside some vault, if you will, that people don't necessarily have to see unless there are specific, let's say, legal requirements to look at the actual historical record, etc. That is the current model that's being discussed. No specific resolution has been made. The Publications Board is meeting next Thursday and Friday in New York, and I don't believe that this is one of the issues that will be, it certainly is not going to be an issue that's going to be put up for any kind of vote. And I don't know that at this point it's going to be discussed extensively, because it hasn't really gotten to the point where the committee is going to be capable of producing a kind of a unified recommendation to the Pubs Board that everybody agrees on. There are some other things that have been happening. So these are the first two things that I talked to you about, are things that really are not going to be coming your way either in the context of your SGB involvement or as ACM members anytime soon. But there are other things that you will see soon. So one of them that has been discussed extensively is the new policy or updated policy on plagiarism procedures. And that's kind of a detailed document that has been poured over, because there was an older document that people felt was kind of outdated. So this was poured over very meticulously and I'm not going to go through all of that, but I do want to point out that there is kind of an interesting addition to the policy that deals with 5 different levels of plagiarism in terms of their severity and the penalties that would be imposed based on that. So that's something that is being spelled out quite carefully. It might not be entirely new, but there are some additions there. And then there is, or has been, a significant overhaul of ACM's policy as far as what constitutes an author on a paper, and also what the respective responsibilities of different co-authors on a paper are if there is any accusation, assertion, or finding of academic dishonesty with respect to that. So essentially, excuse me, it is, just to kind of boil it down to a few sound bites, because I can't do the entire policy justice in a call like this. But for example, it is not appropriate to take people off of a paper because you might disagree about whether they have contributed enough or not. There are going to be specific guidelines as to how that might be done. It is not going to be appropriate to put people on a paper as a co-author if those people have not actually contributed to that paper in very specific ways. So one of the counter examples that was brought up in a recent email was a team is doing research to answer some kind of scientific question. They obtain a bunch of data. Nobody on the team has the requisite knowledge of statistics to process that data properly. They ask a local statistics expert who helps them work out whatever it is that they need to work out to answer their questions. Does that statistics professor, for example, from another department, deserve to be a co-author on that paper? And the answer to that is a clear no. So, for example, to me, that was kind of a surprise, because my assumption was that if the authors felt that that was appropriate, they could include that person in the as a co-author on the paper. It turns out that person, by ACM's policy, should be included in the acknowledgements, but not as a co-author. So what this does is it actually prevents certain types of abuses where especially very senior people might find their names on many different papers out of deference or even outright fear, or junior people might find their names not on a paper because they're just being exploited, for example. And that goes in hand with what I think is going to be the last thing that I want to talk to you about, because there's also a digital artifacts policy that I don't want to focus on today because it's kind of dry and boring. But the one that is relevant, that goes in hand with what I just talked about in the context of plagiarism, is ACM's anti-coercion and abuse policy. And the ACM anti-coercion and abuse policy specifies everything from different things, I guess maybe not everything, but different things that are pertinent in this context that go from overt things such as bullying to more kind of subtle things that I just mentioned a second ago, such as demanding on being to be on somebody's paper, threatening people in various ways, that they're going to be taken off the paper for different reasons, demanding as an editor that people cite your papers. Apparently, this is something that happens quite a bit. In fact, there have been specific examples of editors requiring that related work sections of papers get expanded significantly, with a bunch of their own papers being in the list of supposedly relevant work. Obvious things like a professor strongly hinting to a student that it might be a good idea for them to make sure that the results are what the professor thinks they should be, so a student feels pressured to fake the data without the professor ever giving explicit directions that that is something that should happen. In other words, the professor kind of inoculating themselves and exposing the student. The more overt things that may result in a review of a paper suggesting strongly that the authors do something that would directly benefit a reviewer and things of that nature. So just kind of spelling out specific things that would explicitly disallow for any of this type of abuse, and also that would give somebody who is in an inferior position a level of protection, if you will, against the kind of abuse that in most extreme cases, as shocking as it might sound, they do tend to happen. So that's basically as much as I wanted to say. As I told Donna already, I didn't want to go for a really long time. These are, as I said, really long policies. They try to spell out as much as is reasonable. And eventually you'll get them in your inbox at some point, one way or another anyway. So I can just take questions right now.
Okay, so we have a question just about, Nino, you being the point person if people have issues to bring up with the pubs board. So I assume that they should just send you an email about that?
Sending me an email directly works great. Happy to do whatever it takes. We can follow up with a phone call, or you know, depending on the specifics of the issue.
And also, do you have any notes that you would be able to distribute out summarizing some of what you've talked about here?
If it's okay with everybody, one thing that I think I would prefer to do is instead of having me summarize this, because this is again based on reading of these documents, this is all going to be discussed by the pubs board next week. So when those minutes get produced, I might as well just share them with the SGB if that is okay. Otherwise, or some sanitized version of those. If you would prefer, I can just, of course, you know, do my own take on this stuff. Either way is fine with me.
No, I think that sounds fine. And obviously we're recording this session, so people can go back and listen to it. But I think because the pubs board is meeting and they'll have minutes from that meeting, I think that's probably where we should point to next, because so much of this is in process.
That's correct. Some of these policies are really close to being finalized and are going to be voted on probably next week. Others are, you know, it's incredible how many times I just completely misjudge the situation, in the sense that you know, there's a policy draft, it looks really good to me, and then at the last moment people start bringing up issues, and it basically ends up getting completely rewritten in places. So some of this stuff that's work in progress is going to come down the pike in weeks to months. Other stuff is going to be done within the next week.
Okay, perfect. It doesn't look like there's any other questions, so I think we should be ready to move on. Thank you so much for this really valuable information, and especially trying to present it, the complexities of it, in so short of a time. So we appreciate that.
Thanks.
Jeff, is there anything you want to say until before we move on to hearing from the various SIGs?
No, I think just kind of a quick introduction of what the best practices are surrounding essentially succession planning and candidates. One of the things that has come up a number of times in the last year has been a number of the SIGs have been unable to put up 2 candidates for leadership positions in their SIGs. And while yes, that can get approved, and I went through it myself actually, it's certainly not what we think are best practices that we'd like to do that. And I know certainly SIGGRAPH itself has looked at that in a lot of details about why you couldn't get a second candidate possibly for roles. And I think looking at that and trying to figure out, I think that's really what we're looking at here is, how do you do a good job of planning people to take over roles, both for conferences and also within the SIG? And I think that's kind of what we're interested in looking at, and what people are doing with regards to that, and has it been successful?
Okay, perfect. So I'm going to go through the various SIGs. I think that'll be the easiest way to do this. If I know that some of you are sitting in for SIG chairs and maybe you don't feel adequately prepared or knowledgeable on this topic to respond, and that's perfectly fine. If that's the case, you can just say so and we'll move on to the next SIG. but we would sincerely like to hear from those of you who have struggled with this and those of you who have found sort of solutions to help you really create a more robust pipeline for volunteer development. So let's start with, well, SigWeb, Dick had to leave, actually, he already did. So Lori, let's start with you at SigUX.
I'm here. I just had to remember how to unmute myself, and I'm sorry. I've been trying to deal. I'm responsible for streaming commencement, and our stream has not been working well, so I've been kind of on and off. Clarify for me what I'm answering.
So what Jeff mentioned is that there are several SIGs that have had trouble fielding 2 candidates for certain positions.
Yes.
So we're wondering if anyone has best practices to share or tactics to share to help make this, to help avoid a 1 candidate run.
The one thing that we have been doing, I'm in the 2nd year of a 3rd year term, and we are having volunteer issues in all aspects, identifying people who are willing to take on even some of our conference leadership roles. So what we have been doing at the executive committee level is trying to identify people early and talk to them early, not just at nomination time. So for example, our election cycle is, roughly a year away. We've already started to talk to people about our roles on the board. Would you be interested in participating on the board? I've also really run our committee with really unprecedented transparency for our organization. We are very careful to share our minutes. I write a summary to the community every 3 months so they know the activities we're doing to try to demystify for our community what the board is. Is that successful? I don't know yet. I am worried about that, but we'll see.
Well, those sound like good ideas, actually. So yeah, we're looking forward to hearing more about that as we go. Thank you for sharing. Sig Spatial.
Yes, okay, yeah. I had to remember also unmuting myself. I'm sorry. Yes. Okay, so this is from SIG Spatial. This is actually my 8th year in the EC of SIG Spatial. I was treasurer for 3 years, then I was chair for 3 years, and then part of our rules is that the chair becomes a busted chair in the next EC. Also, I was in the recruiting committee of finding candidates for the last election. Honestly, we did not have this kind of problem at all in SIG Spatial. We always have people who we can put up front. I think part of the reason this is that we do involve junior colleagues in the conference organization a lot. If you look at our BC chairs, all kind of positions in our main conference, it's split between a senior colleague and a junior colleague. So we always have people come up there. Another thing I find in SIG Spatial is that it's quite diverse. So we have people with a database background, we have people with data mining background, we have people with visualization background, and so on. For each kind of background, we find at least someone who's like can go up. So we try to be diverse also in kind of this, and that gives some of internal competition that a lot of people are willing to go and serve to kind of represent their diversity. Yeah, so I think this is my 2 cents here.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. SIG Soft.
Yeah, so I'm in my 1st year as SIG Soft chair. So I don't think we have a problem, but I think Will or Nino can maybe comment on it. So one thing we've been doing to basically get people excited to participate in SIG Soft is we had a call for volunteers last fall, and the idea is to identify many people who are interested in contributing to the community and who help driving different initiatives. And that also helps us to find out who are good people who could take on a leadership role in the SIG Soft committee.
Okay, excellent. It's I do have a question about calling for volunteers. I know that coming from a smaller SIG, there's the fear that there's just going to be a lot of work. That it's going to be a lot of work to take on these roles, and I wonder if anyone has ways that they've been able to address that or demystify it, or is that a simple matter of bringing on more and more roles, splitting things off into more and more roles. So that's another question that people can address if they would like. Sig Sim.
Hi. My first thought for us is that we're a very small, tight-knit SIG. So what we tend to do is encourage our fellow colleagues to give it a go. And I'm not sure how easily feasible that would be in a several thousand member sim, but a lot of us in our smaller sim, we really know each other. We're like, oh, come on, John, you can do this, So we find that pretty helpful. Not related to officers per se, but for volunteer work, what we also tend to do is overlap duration in our committee, so not everybody is new at once. So, some of the older people can shepherd in and show the newer people so they don't feel as lost and overwhelmed. And we found that to be helpful.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Okay, great. Thank you. Sig Sam.
So I don't know that I have anything tremendously insightful. I can talk a little bit about what we do, but we have nominating committees, and my personal experience is that they lay on the guilt pretty heavily, and so you feel like you have to agree to help. But I think the reason that we haven't, despite being a very small SIG, the reason that we haven't been having trouble finding people to fill positions is because we have a pretty strong tradition with our main conference, which is with ISAC, of getting young people involved, getting them involved very early in positions in ISAC. So there's a good volunteer ethos in the community for things like this. Probably, truth of the matter is, being such a small SIG helps a little bit because maybe it's not quite so daunting to take on a role as an officer for us as it would be for a large one.
And then by the time that they get to the EC, like the secretary, treasurer, vice chair, chair positions, are they tenured, or are they older? Like they started early, or? Yeah. So everybody that's an officer for us, at least the ones that have obvious analog to tenure, we all have tenure. But there are also, all of us have had, I bet all of us have had at least three positions within ISAC before we enter as an officer into SIGSAM. Okay. All right, perfect. Okay, SIGSAC.
Hi. So I think in terms of the candidates, I guess other than the last election, I think we always had two candidates for each position, and again, I think we're just doing fairly standard things, get people involved early on. So our major conference, CCS, has lots of different roles, tutorial chair, workshop chair. So these are tend to be fairly junior colleagues, and get them involved, and then eventually serve in more senior roles. And recently I had to ask people to serve as an award chair. So sometimes some people, the first couple I asked actually turned it down because of various reasons. But there's a big enough community to find the qualified people, so that didn't turn out to be a big problem.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. SIG Plan.
So I think we do lots of the things that people have been saying. I think as far as rotating SIG leadership positions, the main thing is really, honestly, the current chair going around and twisting arms. And that actually works fairly well. So the last few elections have had several people contesting them. For all the major positions. For conferences, I'm a little less sure about exactly what we do, but except that it seems to work fine. the conference steering committees seem to do a great job of ensuring their own continuity. And I do notice that, that there are quite a few younger people involved.
Okay, excellent. How about SIGOPS?
Sorry, I was in trouble unmuting, pressing the wrong button.
You're good.
So for us, so we had some trouble with the elections. That we had a whole bunch of, I asked a bunch of people. They said that they would do it, and I had quite a few people pulling out at some point for whatever reasons, which is very frustrating because then I sort of had to find one person to replace them. That happened like 3 times. And maybe that's a problem with the bigger SIGs, like SIGOPS. It can, I guess, be a little daunting. For many positions, though, I've had good luck introducing co-chairs for positions. I think that has really made a lot of these things easier to, more palatable for people to take on. So I've introduced co-chairs. Actually, I introduced co-chairs for the PC, for SSB, also for the general chair. And in general, I try to at least find two, sometimes 3 people for a particular position. I think that helps a lot.
Yeah, we've had success with that too, splitting up the work, or at least the perception that you're splitting up the work.
Yeah, it's still a lot of work, but at least you're not alone.
Right, you're not alone. Thank you. Sigmod? Maybe we lost Sigmod. Okay, what about SIG Multimedia?
SIG Multimedia, able to undo the mute button really quickly because I was hovering over it. Yeah, you got me, Claire. Okay, so SIG Multimedia is one of those mid-sized SIGs, and I am 2 years in the role of chair, but I was elected chair without having spent any time whatsoever on the SIG executive. So I didn't serve my time, so to speak, and I had that guilt lever that Chris from SIGSAM referred to twisted on me. My predecessor was also a very good arm twister. What we're also in a position is that we have 3 elected officers to the executive, and my director, our director of conferences, also never spent any time on the SIG executive. So looking back on that, that was a big mistake to have 2 from the 3 elected reps as being newbies on the executive. And I think it's fair to say that we spent the last 2 years sometimes thrashing around, not knowing what to do, and getting quite lost, and learning and making mistakes. And I think it happened that way just because the predecessor had difficulty in identifying candidates. And therefore, our recruitment to be on the slate was done quite late in the day because he had promises from other people who then basically pulled out. Our SIGMM executive is mostly role-based, so people who are chairs of the steering committees from various conferences, and we only have 2 member-at-large positions, so it's very difficult to build up the pipeline of people who for those senior roles, because people say, well, I'm already in a senior position, I'm chairing this conference steering committee and so on. So that means that there isn't a lot of room to grow the talent, if I can use that. Having experienced the traumas, though, of being in the role without having had spent time in the executive, I've already in my own mind started plotting succession. It was one of the first things I did. I'm wanting to put together a candidate slate for our elections, which would the elected representatives will take over from 2 years now. But we're also doing is that we're trying to do it in a way which guarantees gender diversity in the roles of chair and vice chair. For conferences, we don't have a pipeline problem. We have a lot of folks interested in taking on the conference roles for a good number of years ahead of schedule. So that's a good, healthy pipeline. So I think that, in summary, the range of experiences I would say that you're experiencing, Claire, across the feedback from people, I don't think it's necessarily systematic. I think that sometimes you'll have a SIG like ours, which is running dry of candidates, and then the next speaker might be from a SIG who's got a lucky pipeline. So I don't think there's anything systematic happening here. We were just in a particular fallow or lean couple of years, which is why they got me. Okay.
Okay, well, they were lucky to find you. Thank you. All right, SIG metrics.
Okay, let me unmute. So I'm speaking on behalf of Visual. He did send me a few lines by email, just like, okay, what do I say in the 3 minutes? So I think Visual is really, I think this is his second term. He's really running the SIG very efficiently. We have a 4-member board, and the responsibilities are kind of light, and also we take similar approaches like other SIGs. For example, we build a pipeline, because I also served on the board for a number of years. In general, at a lot of the meetings, we would discuss like, who are the next sort of generation, like young energetic people. So we would try to involve them in various services early on, so that we kind of prepare them for the down the road. So the pipeline approach, for example, Vishal himself, he was first on the board and then become the vice chair and then the chair. So you see, like, by the time he's chair, he's very comfortable, in terms of what, how to get the job done. So that's basically the approach. We also have the election committee, and I think Vishal starts several different committees. And the election committee basically, spend a lot of time kind of recruit people like potential young, energetic people to run, and then basically this made the process very smooth. One last thing I think the Visual is effective is that he asked the current executive committee to document all the major things, all the major responsibilities, also in terms of how to get things done, how to manage different leadership position, and so that so including actually general, I'm reading now, you can tell, including like in TPC chairing, and other things. Basically, the documentation also really helped for next generation. Yeah.
Yeah, I think those were all great points. I think the documentation hasn't been mentioned yet, but that was true for our SIG also. People wanted to see everything spelled out so they knew what they were getting into, and that demystifies the whole process. So I think that was well done. And then having a elections committee also, I think, is an interesting idea in terms of to do the arm twisting, whether the chair needs assistance with that or not. So those are great ideas. Okay, great. How about SIGite?
A couple of notes that I've been taking. We did some internal studies and found out who our most authors are and our most frequent session chairs, and kind of published a list of that. And we have gone to those people because clearly they're participating frequently in our SIG, and they've been very good to agree to help. Another thing that we found that works well is we have permanent positions of conference co-chairs. So the sponsors, the facilities, and papers, each of those has a permanent position. And so they are co, and then we get a person who rotates into that during the actual conference. So if we have a conference in Tacoma like we will this fall, then Tacoma has someone who does it for a year, but they have this other person who's permanent helping them, and it turns out it splits it in half and gives somebody with experience a great deal of input on that, and that's helped tremendously. The rest of the stuff that we're doing is pretty typical, but we've been very pleased to have a good slate of candidates every election cycle.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, SIG-IR.
Hello. So we've been doing a lot of some of the things that have been mentioned so far, but a couple of new ideas. We started a student liaison program a couple of years ago, and the idea behind this is to cultivate folks who are going to want to be in positions later. And so the student liaisons apply, and they're sort of spread out all over the world. We also give them a small budget that they're able to spend during the year, so that also sort of simulates actually does some of the things that folks who are on the executive committee might do. So that's one of the things we've done to try, that I haven't heard yet, that we've put in place to try to cultivate leaders. We haven't had any trouble getting anybody to run. In fact, we always have really excellent people, and the hardest part is choosing between. There's usually 2 or 3 people running for each position, and the hardest part is choosing between those people. Another new thing that we started just this year for our conference volunteers, or not conference volunteers, our volunteers like student travel grant coordinator, information coordinators, we have started giving them free conference registration to SIG-IR in sort of recognition of their contribution. So it's not, you know, paid kind of situation, but just more as a recognition for that. And again, hoping that that will sort of encourage people to work harder, I suppose, and also will help some folks who maybe wouldn't be able to go to the conference otherwise. We, I have to say, I'm about to end my term as chair, and like somebody else mentioned, I started off as treasurer, and our terms are 3 years each, and I'm really tired right now. I'm going to have to be past chair for 3 years, and depending on the outcome of the election, it's either going to be a lot of work for me if all new people come in, or it's not going to be as much work for me if some of the people that get elected are people that are currently in the executive committee. I think these are really long periods of time, and that's one of the things that we've talked about a little bit, about how do we do that, because it's great to have somebody get experience as treasurer, and that's helped me tremendously as chair. But also that's 9 years of me, and I think 9 years of anybody is too much. That starts to get a little bit, I think, too exclusive, if you will. And so I think that those are some things that we've been thinking about in this space.
Okay, those are some great points. Thank you for bringing that up. The 2 to 3 year limit is something that SIGs go back and forth on also, or the election cycle. So that may be another discussion for another time. SIG, HPC. Jeff, you there? You're on mute. All right, we'll skip you for now. SIG Graph.
Okay, the reason I'm here today, as I said earlier, I chair the governance committee for SIGGRAPH, which is a committee that we formed about 2 years ago to create and formalize policies and procedures for all aspects of SIGGRAPH. And then that directly affects our volunteer pipeline. We'll classify our volunteers as 3 different types. One is the conference. The conferences have always done very well. People start out as a subcommittee member. If they do well, then they can become a program chair. They do very well there, they can be a conference chair. That has never been a problem. It's always been a very full pipeline. We have 2 other categories of volunteer. One is standing committees. SIGGRAPH has approximately 17 standing committees, and finding and replacing chairs for that has sometimes been difficult. Some of the committees are new, and we haven't found new chairs for them yet. But again, we're formalizing the process so that the committees have to sort of come up with their own chairs, their own, or a list of suggestions which they submit to our nominations committee. Our nominations committee then interviews all the potential standing committee chairs, does a recommendation to the executive committee, who makes the final choice. And finally, as the executive committee, we had a problem finding candidates for president, so we did away with the job. That was an easy solution. Basically, we do not elect officers anymore. What we did, first thing the governance committee did was recommend, and we had a massive bylaw change a couple years ago, and we just elect directors now. And this upcoming election is the first time that this will happen. We will just have electing directors. The directors elect chair and chair-elect, who serve 1-year term. The idea is that the chair-elect then becomes the chair. The chair can serve possibly a two-year term. In order to do this, we have drastically reduced the workload of what was the president's position. The rest of the EC has taken on a lot of that workload. And so it's a much less intense job. And so we're looking forward to seeing how this works out.
That sounds really interesting. Oh, go ahead.
One other thing that we've done, in order to ensure diversity on our in our elections, we elect 3 people every year. So we would have like 3 directors and then have, say, 5 or 6 candidates. And then the top 3 would win. Now we slot them. We have 3 slots with 2 people in each slot. That way we can pick, say, somebody from the technical research community, somebody from the business community, somebody from the art community. That way we have a little bit more control over the diversity to ensure that our EC does not become all one small community. I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, my only question was, decentralization seems really wonderful the way you describe it. I'm wondering if you've had any efficiency issues in terms of getting everybody, is it like, are there a lot of cats that need to be herded by the director?
I'm not quite sure I understand your question.
Well, I mean, when you don't have a president, the workload, by decentralizing the workload, by distributing it,
right.
Is it harder to get everybody on the same page all the time?
No.
Okay.
Quick answer is no. We will have a chair. I mean, we still have a president because our current president has 1 more year in her term. But we will, in September, we will, the EC will choose a chair-elect who will become the chair for next year. But no, that has not been an issue. The idea of decentralizing the work has so far worked out very well.
Okay, wonderful. Wonderful to hear. Okay. SIG-DA.
SIG-DA didn't have problems finding leadership successors in recent years. We are 7 executive members, and as far as I know, we had about at least twice as many candidates. So how it works in SIG-DA is a candidate applies for the executive committee, but not for a position. And once elected in the executive committee, the elect members, they discuss, they distribute in a discussion the positions. And that worked out well in the past years. And again, there were quite more candidates than positions. That's about the executive committee. Regarding the conferences, finding successors is quite diverse, depends on the conference. Some conferences, of course, they have executive committees. They would contact the TPZ members with an open call for nominations, and then there would be a formal selection process to find a new general chair, for example. But what is quite common in the conferences we are sponsoring is that there's typically a pipeline. So if a person is being elected into the executive committee of a conference, the candidate would first start with a lower position to get into the pipeline. For example, become a workshop chair, tutorial special sessions chair, and then at the end of the pipeline become program and general chair. And that is quite some of the conference we sponsored. That's the case, and that's also worked well. We did not have a problem finding successors. That had never been a problem as far as I was involved.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. Let's see, 60.
Yeah, so a few things that people mentioned, and we'll just sort of reiterate. We do a lot with junior senior roles, particularly in our conferences. We have moved to a policy of essentially open calls for everything, sending messages to our listserv about any open positions that are volunteer for the organization. That sometimes yields a lot of results, sometimes not, but it makes we think it makes the community more aware of what's available, and if they're not ready right now, it could be something they could be looking towards in the future. We spend quite a bit of time at the conferences themselves talking about the different opportunities that are available and encouraging people to apply sort of publicly, as well as the executive board goes out and tries to sort of help with some of those things, and the conference organizers themselves. And one of the other things that we do is we do have a first timers event at our main, the big technical symposium for SIGC. And at that point, we do also, even though they're brand new to the community, talk about the fact that we want them to become involved in the community, not just be an attendee. And so we spend some time with that. And we just started 2 years ago a session at the conference itself entitled How to Volunteer with the Organization, that sort of invites people during a lunchtime where there's not a scheduled lunch. It's a lunch on your own time. Come in to the last half hour of that lunch period and hear from people about different opportunities that are available. And just trying to sort of make it understanding to the community that there's a lot available for you to become potentially interested in, a lot of different ways you can become involved. It's not just run the conference. There's a lot of other things that you could be doing. And so I think that's our approach, is to try to make it as public as possible, that there's a lot of opportunities, and that, you know, if you want to find out about it, here's ways you can get information, and here's people you can talk to get information about what the different roles and responsibilities are.
Yeah, I think that's really smart. We've talked a little bit about diversity, and people have used that term in a lot of different ways. But one of the things we talked about at a previous meeting is the idea that sometimes when we call for volunteers, we get only the most ambitious people. And so we don't get a very diverse group of volunteers from which to choose. And providing things like how to volunteer sessions at our conferences would demystify it enough to maybe attract people who you know, are interested but aren't too sure, and aren't used to sort of being so public with their ambition to serve a volunteer role. So I think that that's a really good idea as well. Okay, Sig Kai.
Okay, so we are one of the ones that for at least 2 election cycles now, the EC have not quite had enough people. I would say that we have already been thinking about the next election. Like, we actually started right from the beginning. There's 2 things that we focused on. So the first is we're putting together a really well thought out process about how to get people even to be interested in the position and how to get nominees. This usually falls on the past president. So our past president, Lauren Trevine, has thought this out, wrote out a document now, and is sharing it around. And we're actually, we're trying it out right now because we have 2 open VP at large positions because we had 2 people step down from the EC. So we decided, hey, this is an opportunity to try out the new process. And that's actually been really interesting. And it actually brings up some questions about how our nominating process and our entire sort of election process isn't quite well aligned with our conference, our main conference. And surprisingly, the main conference is the best time to talk to people about stepping into these roles. And by the time that happens, the nomination process has already passed by. So we're talking about that right now. One of the other things is, and this is for pretty much anything, the nominating committee, that's their job to drum up the interest in the position. Sitting back and waiting for people to step forward, it just doesn't work. And so we've made it now the requirement that the nominating committee has to be an active committee and has to reach out to people and talk to people and really explain to them what are these positions. We've been doing a lot of open calls for all of our open adjunct chair positions, our open committee positions. Some of them have had lots of interest, lots of people apply. Some of them have had absolutely no interest, nobody's applied. So this comes back to a lot of people sometimes don't hear about it, no matter how many times we post it on all social media, website, listservs, etc. And also some things people just want to do and some things people just don't want to do. And so then you actually have to go out and elicit people, or maybe just, you know, you can't fill the position. Think of a different type of way of doing the work. I have faced two different groups of people that have given me challenge. On the one hand are people who perceive it as a lot of work, it being anything that's open. So it could be an EC position, it could be anything. So the question is always, well, how much work is this? We're having a lot of junior faculty members actually being told, nope, don't do that before tenure, pretty much for anything. And that's actually starting to really frustrate me. I think it's the wrong attitude of community members, but that's culture change, and I don't know if I can fix that in the next 2 years. I've also had people who seem to think that if they can just get into the upper echelons, that they'll have all this power and they're going to change everything. That's not how it works. I wish I could change everything. So that's also really hard when you're talking to people to sort of get a feel for, are you doing this because you want to really help the community, or are you doing this because you're coming in for your like one thing and you're not really going to do the work that needs to be done in various positions. We've been collecting a lot of data about what are some of the pathways to positions. So we're going to turn this into an entire sort of like how to volunteer kind of thing, because it's sort of, we're trying to demystify a little bit, like, well, what do I have to do to get to this? Well, this is what typically people have experienced. They've done like about 4 different positions before they did X, to give people a little sense of what goes into it. We did also the How to Be a Volunteer sessions. We started this maybe about 4 years ago at our primary CHI conference. And then since then, we now have a position within our conferences board who actually will go to any of our 23 or 24 conferences in total to do a How to Be a Volunteer session. We put aside budget for it and everything just to sort of present, this is all the different types of volunteer positions. These are the ways that you can get involved. This is what's, you know, how you get into these positions. However, through all of this, the one thing we've really struggled with is how do we manage this? We're a very large SIG, and we have a lot of people who complain that even though they've been stepping up, that they're not being asked to do things on the one end. And on the other end, we have leadership saying, I don't know which one of these people I can trust. So we've actually started looking for a volunteer management software. And when we figure it out, we're more than happy to share it with everybody. But but we realize that if you look out there, there's actually a lot of volunteer management software. So we're doing a lot of sort of just analysis of what's out there. But we have this vision that maybe the possibility of people being able to sign up and keep track and sort of talk about what volunteer positions they've had, and then people who are looking for volunteers, whether they're conference committees or we're looking for people to be on the EC or any of the EC committees, can sort of like say, hey, look, you know, I forgot about this person. They have actually done a lot, to make those things a little bit more apparent. And I think it was Diane who was, sorry, I'm not sure if it was, but I think it was, who was talking about 9 years. I'm in the same boat, and so is our past president. So he was on the EC for 3 years, and he was president for 3 years, and he stepped down. He sort of set the standard that he's like, and I'm going to be past president for 3 more years. Nobody should be on the EC for more than 9 years. And I said when I came in that I'm going to do the exact same thing. I was executive vice president for 3 years, president for 3 years. I will be past president for 3 years. I believe as well that 9 years is enough for anybody to be on the EC. I want to see turnover. I want to see opportunities being given to the next generation. So by making that like statement, we're hoping that just in general, that is a little bit more of a culture shift, that, you know, first of all, nobody just sits and like, you know, just sits there and makes all the decisions, like we make all the decisions, but whatever, forever and ever. The things they think that I have control over is crazy. But yeah, I really think that's something that people should at least talk about and really think about.
Does Kai have a description of what the chair does, considering that you are one of the SIGs with so many conferences, that it does seem like a daunting position that the chair would oversee like 23 conferences, or are those just the minor ones?
We had 23 minor, and then Kai, which is our 24th. No. And when Lauren and I were uncontested as president and vice president like 4 years ago, we convinced ourselves it wouldn't be that much work. And then I agreed to like go up for president. So
well, is that, I mean, that's one of the questions. Is Kai so big that finding someone to fill the chair role will always be a struggle? I mean, is there any way to manage that? Is there any way to sort of talk to maybe SIGGRAPH and figure out how to distribute it?
I know. I was taking notes.
Get you guys together.
So I'm actually joining SIGGRAPH at their May executive committee meeting, so in Pittsburgh. So I'm just going to ask them a lot of questions, because I think we're kind of at that point where we do need to take a different approach. I don't know what that's going to be, but we're in that huge process. We just appointed an adjunct chair for volunteer development, because this is such a huge problem on so many levels. And yeah, definitely I'm trying to learn from this whole discussion. So I thank everybody.
I see SIGGRAPH trying to get in there.
Well, I was just going to say that our president/chair does not deal directly with the conferences. Our two major conferences, SIGGRAPH and SIGGRAPH Asia, each have their own conference advisory groups who report to the executive committee. And then for all of our smaller conferences, which again is, I don't know how many, probably about the same number as SIG-CHI, maybe 15 or 20 small conferences, we have a small conferences committee which handles that. So the president doesn't directly deal with any of those.
Yep. We have a lot of steering committees and council steering committees, and we have multiple layers of that. But and so luckily I'm like separated from a lot of the operations, but there's still an amazing amount of coordination across all of the things that we're doing. That, yeah, I'm lucky that I also have an amazing executive vice president. So we share the burden very equally, actually.
Okay, well, keep us posted on your developments. Okay, SIGBio.
Hi, SIGBio is now approximately operating for 10 years. And so far, we have managed to have competition for key leadership positions, including the chair, vice chair, and also board of directors. In fact, in the last election for board of directors, and it's a slate of candidates, and then we select a subset of them. And one of them who was not selected was so unhappy with the election that he pretty much turned himself off from the society, and I've been trying to involve him in other voluntary roles, and it has been difficult. So it's good that we have people who are interested in doing it. So I think many good ideas have been relayed already, so I don't want to repeat any of that. But one thing that we do is that for us, our life revolves around our flagship conference, ACM BCB. So the SIGBio Society basically goes to the conference so that we can meet a large fraction of our members. I think at least 50% of our members go to that conference, maybe more. So we host a SIGBio meeting at the conference for 2 hours. And that's where we kind of describe what SIGBio has done for the last year. And we have the treasurer come up and present the budget and how it was spent. And along with that, we also make a call for any volunteers that we would like to recruit and so on. So that kind of has helped us. So I think there are some people who are interested in these voluntary positions and leadership positions, and I think we've been able to tap into that crowd by going to this meeting and looking for them there. The other thing is that to try to bring youngsters together, SIGBIO sponsors a social get-together for students and younger folks, and we have a volunteer who actually organizes that event. And how they organize that event depends upon the city where the conference is being run. It might be taking everybody to a bowling alley, or going to some place where they can all hang out together. So we leave the planning completely to themselves. They are actually, the young people are really very budget conscious, so they haven't been really asking for much money on their own. They are very frugal, and so we let them do whatever they do. So that's one place where they network and they come up with ideas of how they can help, and then they come back and report to the leadership, and we have taken up on a couple of those opportunities, particularly on social media and things like that, that they like to do, that the old guard doesn't know how to do effectively. So that has been our modus operandi so far, a few things that might be unique to us.
Okay, that sounds great. Thank you. Sigbed. Oh, might have lost Sigbed. Sigarch.
Hi, can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think again a lot has been said already, so I will keep it short hopefully. When I started, this was 4 years ago as chair. We had the chair pretty much did everything, and the rest of the EC was mainly advisory. So the chair would send out emails, and then the EC would respond back or not. I tried to change the structure by assigning jobs to each EC member, so distributed the load. But part of that was also to increase the total load. We ramped up our activity portfolio a lot. And so at the end of the day, what happened was everybody got a lot of work, which actually turned out to be great. Most people really stepped up, and I think the community got pretty excited by a lot of the initiatives we took on. And so an unintended consequence of this was that we ended up having a lot of volunteers for all these new and exciting activities, and so we built this volunteer pipeline. And when we called for nominations for the new election just a couple months ago, we got a lot of people. So in fact, we had more people than we needed, and so our ballot has one or two more people total than we needed, except for the chair position. So the chair, we really expanded our activity portfolio, and the chair position has got pretty, it is a lot of work. So we are, one of my things for the next EC will be to advise them to figure out a better way to offload even more of the work that the chair has, and I have some ideas for that. But I think one thing that really struck a chord was that most ECs, most SIGs seem to have 3-year terms. So the way SIGARCH, and I didn't realize that, the way SIGARCH runs is our elections are for 2 years, but then we are asked if we want to continue at the end of 2 years. And so traditionally, we've always wanted to continue, and certainly in my case, all the new stuff we started had not quite gelled by then, so it made a lot of sense to continue. But I think 4 years is just way too long for one committee, and so I'm going to definitely advise our next committee to rethink this. I think 2 years still is short. 3 is probably okay, the right sweet spot. In terms of overlap and so on, we do run the election cycle so that all of the entire EC is up for election again. Typically, we have some incumbents re-elected, and the chair serves as past chair, and so there is some continuity. So that's good. We do open calls now. We actually, one of the things that we got from the open call in the last cycle was that we had someone from China apply to be on the election ballot, and we would have never thought of that. And this is the first time we've had someone from China on our ballot, which I think is great. So we would have never thought of this person ourselves. Or, there's nothing important to read here except that this is why it's important to be transparent and so on. We just tend to think of people we see all the time. Let's see, I was taking a few notes and I'm just going through. Yeah, I think that's all I have to say. The points that have been, most of the other things have been said enough times before.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. You guys, we have 4 more of you and we have about 9 more minutes. So so yeah, just be efficient. SIG AI.
Okay, I'll be efficient here. Most of the things have already been said, but we generally ask in our newsletter and listservs, webinars about volunteers, and we ended up trying to vet them. We have had some imposters or people that we didn't think could actually do the job or said they could and couldn't. So now we kind of vet the people a lot ahead of time. We do split it up also amongst multiple people, so we split the positions, so it makes it easier. A lot of people we've had got on some of the board members have gotten busy during their tenure and then just kind of abdicate their role, so the multiple people is actually works out better. And we also have a permanent conference chair, and I like the volunteer software idea. That's a great idea. Also, I wanted to just ask if somebody was taking a list of all the things that people suggested here besides just the audio track.
You don't want to listen to this all over again?
Unfortunately, I didn't. So if anybody did, could they pass that around? Because I think there's a lot of really good ideas that I only kind of noted, but not all of them. That's all.
Okay, perfect. And we'll put together a list. Thank you very much. SIG AI.
I'll be quick. Typically, our immediate past chair recruits a full slate of candidates. It's challenging, but we're actually very committed to having elections. We think they're healthy. That's how I became chair. I hadn't had a previous office, and the expectation by everyone was that the Ada Letters editor would win the election handily. Somewhat surprisingly, I won. And the happy thing is we have and I also voted for my opponent. So we actually have a fully qualified chair in waiting, and we'll just do mouth-to-mouth recruiting in terms of by word of mouth, because we're a small SIG, but we are really committed to having elections.
All right, perfect. Is that it? Did I cut you off?
Yes, I'm done. Thanks.
Okay, sorry. There's a little lag there. SIG ACT.
Hi, I'm just a member at large filling in for my SIG chair, and I don't really have anything to add to this conversation. Succession planning is not something that I haven't been involved in discussions about that, but I've been enjoying and learning from hearing what all the rest of you have to say.
Perfect, thank you. All right, Sherry, your last SIG access.
All right. So we do have elections every 3 years with a full slate, but sometimes the same people get reelected. So we have a bunch of people now. We have a little concern because if all the current officers have been officers in one way or another for quite a while now, and so there's a danger that we could have a complete turnover and difficulty with continuity next time. But in general, I think we have a pretty good pipeline, and it's basically due to capitalizing on the energy that the conference generates. And we have in general been moving more towards having 2 people in conference positions, which increases the pipeline of people that we get to see in these roles and get to know. But we also have our, we have an annual public meeting at the conference, and usually quite a lot of people who have never heard of SIG Access come to that meeting because so many other people from the conference go to the meeting. So it's sort of like a social, like, come and get involved thing. And so that's where I have the chance to call for volunteers, explain how people get involved, and we usually get quite a few people who are all excited at the conference who come and put their names in. So that's what we do.
All right, perfect. Thank you all for sharing all these great ideas. We really appreciate it. Every time we have one of these discussions, we're always pleasantly surprised at the many great ideas that you all come to the meeting with, and that I think genuinely will help the other SIGs in this manner. I'm gonna now pass it on to Jeff to close this out.
All right, so I certainly appreciate everyone being on. I would like that if you have comments about running the meeting this way, how it worked, any ideas to make this better would be terrific. You know, we're looking at this, trying to reduce travel, of course, for everyone for going to a one-day meeting in Chicago. I expect we're still going to have at least one in-person meeting, just to recognize if you see people, of course, having this kind of a call is a lot easier once you're familiar with folks. But you know, we'll look at this, and one of the ideas could be is, you know, we might even have this, you know, certainly more than just, you know, once every 6 months. You know, if we find it valuable, we could do it more often. Again, we heard comments from a lot of folks that a little more notice would be helpful, trying to schedule this out in advance, and we'll certainly try and do that. And you know, everything looks great. We'll try and get the audio up. We just had a suggestion about maybe trying to get the audio converted to text, and we'll look into doing that so that it's available for folks. And look forward to you know, doing further. You know, I just would like to reiterate, you know, in the same things about transition. You know, I was on EC for 11 years, so I fully understand, you know, for the long-serving times, and I think that's one of the reasons why SIGGRAPH particularly has been looking, and I think we'll be looking forward to hear how it works and how it works. You know, other SIGs are doing this, and you know, we'll continue putting information together. So, Donna, any last thoughts or words that you'd like to mention here?
I know, I just want to thank everybody for participating. I think this was a wonderful experiment.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. And like I say, we'll send out a links to when we get the video and the text up, we'll get that out for folks. Let me ask one question, if you would suggest. I have been considering us putting out a Google Teams site or Drive site or something where we can have documents that it's easy for people to follow up and find information. And I think that's where we'll try and do these kinds of things. And it'll be pretty open to let people have access to it, so it's pretty easy to get to it. So that's where we may be going with information from publications and other things to make it an easy point for us to find. All right. Well, thank you very much, and I hope everyone has a great weekend.
Thanks very much, Jeff and Claire. It was great.
Okay.